Before the headlines and the noise, before the debates and the takes, there's a quieter story pulsing underneath. A story about what struggle makes of a person when no one is watching, and why the hidden parts of a life can echo louder than the biggest stage. My dear friends, when we talk about Charlie Kirk, people often point to the spark, the directness, the willingness to confront ideas head on, the stamina to speak when the room turns cold. But every bright flame has a long, difficult kindling. Behind the moments you've seen were seasons you didn't, long stretches where confidence was tested, resolve was stretched thin, and purpose had to be chosen again without applause. The public boldness that draws attention rarely tells you about the private costs that forge it. Standing for something early means standing alone often. It means learning to carry responsibility while you're still learning to carry yourself. It means facing doubt, fear, and the nagging sense of not being enough, and refusing to let any of those be the final word. These are the chapters people skip, the ones written in late night prayers, quiet questions, and small, stubborn choices. That silence isn't empty, it's shaping. Greatness almost never crashes in. It grows in hidden, faithful inches. And if that's true for Charlie, it's true for you. The parts of your story that others miss may be the very parts that matter most. What you build where no one sees will one day outspeak what everyone hears. Keep walking steadily even when it seems unnoticed. The quiet places, where conviction outlasts comfort, are where God writes the sentences that give the public story its weight. Culture loves a headline, but it often ignores the hard context. We applaud outcomes and skim past origins. Boldness, though, isn't born in easy rooms. It's carved out in the furnace of trial, in the ache of being misread, in the grind of showing up when the echo is louder than the applause. What appears as clarity and conviction on stage began as conflict and refining offstage. There's a cultural habit of celebrating success while pretending the bill was never due. The truth is that strength is never an accident. It grows next to criticism, doubt, and the pressure that makes many people bow out early. That pressure didn't crush, it purified. Every strong word you hear publicly was preceded by unglamorous work. Hours of study, self-searching, setbacks turned into lessons, and the discipline to keep going when quitting felt reasonable. That's why this story connects beyond one person's name. All of us have felt the gap between what people see and what it costs to become steady. What the public admires is always anchored to what was once kept quiet. The confidence you notice is not just the nerve to speak. It's the spine to stand when support runs thin, to wrestle through questions without losing the thread of purpose, to pray for direction and then move with it. Authenticity resonates because it has a history. When people hear a voice that has been tempered in difficulty rather than pampered by ease, they know the difference. The stage gets the spotlight, the silence gets the substance. That substance includes details many would rather not revisit. Early rejection that stings, opinions dismissed out of hand, motives dissected by people who never called to ask. From the start, there were rooms where ideas were belittled, where competence was questioned, where the audacity to speak was judged more harshly than the content itself. Those moments are more than obstacles, they're training. Rejection forces you to clarify what you believe and why. Criticism, handled honestly, sharpens arguments and strengthens endurance. The doubts hurled at you can either dictate your ceiling or deepen your roots. When the immediate feedback is harsh or absent, you learn to anchor to purpose rather than to praise. That is where resilience grows, when every door feels closed, and you keep knocking, not because notoriety is the goal, but because calling is not a negotiation. History is full of men and women who step into resistance not because they enjoy the fight, but because truth invites conflict with comfortable falsehoods. The pushback isn't proof you've lost your way. It's often confirmation you've left the safe path for the necessary one. What emerged from those early seasons wasn't a craving for controversy. It was a steadier, tested resolve, the kind you need when visibility increases and the margins for error narrow. There is also a lonelier landscape, few describe plainly. The public sees speeches, appearances, articles. The private life feels the weight of expectation, the quiet of isolation, and the constant inventory of whether you are truly equal to the work in front of you. Leadership has a way of placing you in a crowd and making you feel alone at the same time. Friends don't always understand the hours. Peers second, guess the priorities. Family bears the spillover of schedules shaped by fights you didn't start but couldn't avoid. In those spaces, you learn to live from conviction rather than consensus. Loneliness becomes a teacher narrowing your focus, forcing you to trade noise for discipline, and anchoring your identity in something steadier than approval. Doubt visits everyone who aims at meaningful work. Am I capable? Is this wise? Does any of it matter? Those questions don't disqualify you. Facing them honestly can purify motives and deepen humility. Confidence is not the absence of doubt. It's the decision to act in spite of it, with integrity intact. The quiet wrestle between fear and faith forms a backbone that no stage can supply. Much of God's work in a life happens there, in untelevised hours where you confront limitations, ask for wisdom, listen longer than you talk, and let perseverance do what talent can't. Those private costs also stretch into relationships and rhythms. Saying yes to a purpose means saying no to comforts that once came easily. Routines shift, social circles change, misread motives test patience. Influence isn't free, it invoices your time, your energy, and often your peace. The temptation is to chase visibility and neglect the roots that keep you honest. But the only influence that lasts is the kind that grows out of private integrity study when no one demands it, prayer when no one monitors it, discipline when no one claps for it. That is why sacrifices, though rarely applauded, are formative. They shape perspective, deepen empathy, and prepare you to carry responsibility without resenting its weight. Choosing principle over popularity sounds noble until it costs you something you love. Choosing purpose over comfort sounds heroic until it empties your calendar of ease. Yet these are the choices that turn opinions into convictions and platforms into stewardship. The result isn't a hardened heart. It's a steadier one capable of standing firm without becoming brittle, of engaging opponents without losing kindness, of absorbing criticism without outsourcing. Identity, all of this points to a larger pattern. God works in both the visible and the hidden usually comes first. Public fruit grows from private roots. What looks like overnight momentum is almost always years of unseen practice, reflection, and course correction. Quiet seasons serve two purposes. They prepare you for the scale and scrutiny that come with influence, and they serve as a signpost for others. Perseverance, humility, and discipline are not optional accessories. They are the engine. The unseen is not wasted time. It's the workshop. Skills mature there. Character hardens there. Wisdom gathers there. Without that interior scaffolding, boldness is thin and influence is brief. With it, a voice can carry further because its weight does not depend on the room's mood. God's timing is often quiet, but never careless. What he builds in silence, he intends to stand in storms. If you feel overlooked or buried, remember, seeds are buried on purpose. This lens also reframes how we judge success. Platforms report what is easy to count: views, crowds, headlines. Heaven counts what is easy to forget: motives, faithfulness, obedience in small things. The speeches you see are supported by hours you don't, the reading, the rewrites, the self-control to say less than you could, the restraint to fight only necessary battles, the courage to tell the truth without theatrics. These hidden habits are not sentimental details. They are the reason public work endures. God values consistency in obscurity more than spikes of attention. Every unseen act of integrity is a quiet investment that compounds when visibility arrives. And it's not just a lesson for one person's life. It's a pattern for anyone who wants their work to matter beyond a news cycle. What you refuse to compromise when no one's watching prepares you to handle what you can't control when everyone is. So when you hear the name and see the platform, remember the process. The visible boldness and audience did not appear out of thin air. They were built across countless uncelebrated hours of digging deep, holding the line, learning from failure, and returning to first principles. God doesn't waste those hours. He uses them to shape a voice that rings true and a life that holds steady when tension rises. The temptation is to call the quiet seasons delay or detour. More often they are design. They calibrate conviction so it does not drift. They prune hurry so depth can grow. They teach you to measure success by faithfulness instead of noise. Whether you find yourself at a podium or at a desk, leading a movement or leading a family, the pattern stands. Unseen obedience builds seen impact. The gap between what you hope to do and what you're ready to carry is closed in the workshop of hidden faithfulness. Pulling back, this is the universal takeaway. The parts of life we'd rather rush through, the struggle, the uncertainty, the long obedience, are the parts that quietly prepare us for the moments everyone eventually notices. Strength worth trusting doesn't come from applause. It comes from endurance. Courage worth following doesn't come from provocation. It comes from principle. Leadership worth keeping doesn't come from a viral moment. It comes from the quiet, repeated choice to do the next right thing for the right reasons. If Charlie Kirk's story reminds us of anything, it is that conviction has a cost, and that paying it in private yields influence that doesn't wobble in public. Your unseen battles are not wasted. Show up when it's quiet. Practice when it's thankless. Pray when it's dry. Those are the lines God uses later to write sentences that outlast headlines. Perseverance, faithfulness, and steady courage in the offstage moments lay the ground for a life that serves more than self and lasts longer than the news cycle. That's a legacy worth aiming for, one formed in silence and revealed in time. It's easy to look at influence and assume it was inevitable, that a person destined to stand in the public square was always confident, always ready, always received with open arms. But the reality is far less glamorous and far more instructive. Charlie Kirk's early years were not paved with instant recognition or smooth acceptance. They were filled with the kind of rejection that makes most people walk away, the kind of misunderstanding that cuts deeper than outright opposition, and the kind of criticism that gnaws at you when no one else is watching. From the very beginning, there were voices that doubted his ability, mocked his youth, belittled his ideas, and questioned his right even to speak. Those words, sharp as they were, weren't just challenges to his opinions, they were challenges to his very identity, forcing him to decide whether he would shrink back or keep showing up. And what those critics didn't realize was that every dismissal, every sneer, every attempt to push him aside was becoming part of his training. Instead of bowing to them, he used them. Each closed door strengthened his resolve. Each sarcastic comment clarified his purpose. Each round of opposition made him press deeper into conviction. The weight of being misunderstood is heavier than many of us imagine. Standing for truth, especially in public, always invites misinterpretation. Motives are questioned, words are taken out of context, intentions are doubted. It's not just about ideas anymore, it's about character, about whether you deserve to be heard at all. That kind of pressure can paralyze a person, yet for Charlie it became an unexpected teacher. The critics forced him to refine his thinking, sharpen his clarity, and anchor his beliefs in something stronger than approval. Every rejection became a test of whether he believed his message enough to endure discomfort. Every misunderstanding gave him an opportunity to respond with more maturity than his years would suggest. And slowly, the fire that people see today was being forged in the quiet, grueling friction of doubt and resistance. This is where the larger lesson emerges. Too many of us see opposition as a signal to quit. We treat criticism as a verdict instead of as training. But Charlie's journey proves something different. Opposition doesn't mean you're off track. It often means you've stepped into territory that matters. Growth rarely happens in applause-filled rooms. It happens when you're walking through silence and resistance, when you have to decide whether to keep going with no guarantee anyone will thank you. Rejection is not the end of the story, it is the furnace that tempers it, and that truth stretches far beyond politics or culture. It reaches into every corner of life. Whether you're starting a business, building a family, or simply trying to live with integrity, you will face moments where the weight of misunderstanding presses hard. The question is never just about whether you have the courage to start. It's whether you have the endurance to continue when no one claps. What makes Charlie's story compelling is not the stage itself, but the unseen rehearsals of character that prepared him for it. Every public word you've heard was preceded by private battles you haven't. The doubts that whispered, "You're too young, too unprepared, too out of place." The fears that asked, "What if this costs more than you can carry?" The nights where prayer was the only answer to questions that wouldn't stop repeating themselves. These moments are invisible to the outside world, but they are the crucible of influence. Without them, boldness is shallow. With them, boldness carries weight. And it is because of those hidden wrestlings that people today sense authenticity behind his words. They are not just lines prepared for applause. They are convictions tested in the fire of difficulty. That is why his story matters, and why your hidden seasons matter too. They are not detours. They are the preparation ground for the impact you've been called to make. Loneliness has a way of finding anyone who steps into a calling bigger than themselves. For Charlie, this wasn't just the kind of loneliness that comes from being physically alone. It was the deeper kind, the kind that comes from being misunderstood by people who once stood close. Friends drifted away. Colleagues questioned whether his choices were wise. Even family, at times, couldn't fully grasp why he would keep choosing a path that brought so much strain. That isolation is heavy, yet in those quiet places, loneliness turned into a teacher. It stripped away distractions, sharpened priorities, and forced him to anchor his sense of worth in conviction rather than consensus. The lesson is clear. If your mission depends on constant affirmation, you won't survive the moments when applause fades. But if it's rooted in a purpose larger than yourself, loneliness becomes a forge where clarity and strength take shape. Doubt was another constant companion. The questions that echo in every leader's mind were no stranger to him. Am I capable? Am I doing the right thing? Will this matter in the end? These aren't signs of weakness, they're signs of being human. The difference is in how those questions are handled. Doubt can paralyze, but it can also refine. In Charlie's life, each doubt became a doorway into deeper preparation. Instead of quitting, he studied harder, reflected longer, and grounded himself in principles that would outlast public opinion. Over time, confidence emerged not because fear disappeared, but because he learned to move forward in spite of it. That's the truest form of courage, not the absence of doubt, but the willingness to act faithfully even when the answers aren't clear. Behind the headlines and the speeches, this hidden wrestle shaped his public voice more than any crowd ever could. Every moment of fear faced down in private gave strength to every sentence spoken in public. Every unanswered prayer turned into an anchor that steadied him when pressure mounted. These aren't the glamorous parts of a story. They don't trend on social media, but they are the most significant because they're where God does his deepest work. It's in the unglamorous spaces, quiet prayers whispered at night, lonely hours of preparation, unseen tears of frustration, that character is formed. Without those hidden moments, the public voice would ring hollow. With them, it carries authenticity because people can sense when words are forged in fire instead of comfort. And then there's the cost, one of the most overlooked realities of anyone who chooses to stand by conviction. Every decision to speak boldly, to challenge prevailing ideas, to step into controversial debates, came with ripple effects. Some friendships didn't survive the strain. Relationships that once felt steady became complicated. Family bore the weight of his public mission in ways most outsiders never saw. Influence has a price, and it is not just paid in criticism, it is paid in personal sacrifices that no one claps for. Time once free for leisure was consumed by preparation. Energy once reserved for ease was poured into study and discipline. Peace once taken for granted was disrupted by the burden of responsibility. These hidden costs were not accidents, they were necessary. Because leadership rooted in conviction will always demand more than comfort can give, and while those sacrifices may not have been applauded, they were formative. They built resilience, clarified focus, and deepened the authenticity that makes a voice endure long after the crowd moves on. This is why Charlie's story resonates far beyond politics or headlines. It's not just about one man's journey. It's about a principle that applies to anyone seeking to live with conviction. Influence doesn't come free. It demands endurance through loneliness, perseverance through doubt, and faithfulness in sacrifice. These aren't the glamorous parts of the story, but they are the ones that matter most, because they ensure that when the moment comes to stand, the ground beneath your feet doesn't crumble.